The chandeliers shimmered like captured constellations above the glass-walled ballroom, their light glancing off crystal flutes and the gleaming marble floor beyond the glass. The city stretched into the dark, jeweled with 1,000 lights. Damian Vale stood near the terrace doors, one hand in the pocket of his perfectly tailored charcoal suit, the other cradling a glass of something expensive he barely tasted. Charity galas were a ritual for him, another performance, another opportunity to be seen in the right company, say the right words, make the right impression. His posture was a study in composure, but his eyes tracked everything, subtle shifts. In conversation across the room, the calculated laughter of board members' wives, the too eager approach of a young investor angling for an introduction. Damian was precise with his attention, careful where he gave it. It was a habit born of years climbing from nothing to the top of a volatile industry, where trust was currency you didn't spend, unless you were ready to lose it. The crowd parted slightly near the champagne bar, and he noticed her. Lila Monroe didn't quite match the scene. Her dress was elegant, but unflashy, the kind of black silk that let her slip in and out of a room without drawing unnecessary attention. Still, there was something magnetic in the way she carried herself, as if she knew exactly where she stood in the room and didn't care if anyone else noticed. A small camera, discreet but professional, hung from a thin strap at her side. It happened quickly. A waiter passed between them, a tray tilting just enough for the golden liquid to leap over the rim. Damian felt the cold splash on his cuff, saw the startled widening of her eyes as she realized the champagne had also found her shoulder. "Damn," she muttered, catching the drip with her fingers before it reached the floor. "My fault," Damian said automatically, already pulling a folded linen napkin from a nearby table. "I should have dodged." Her tone was amused, not annoyed. "I'll try to be faster next time." Something about the ease of her response caught him off guard. Most people in his world tried to charm him, impress him, or at least flatter him. She wasn't doing any of those things. He offered the napkin, their fingers brushing briefly. "Damian," he said, almost without thinking. "Lila." She didn't offer a last name. He didn't press. They found themselves drawn to the quieter edge of the ballroom, where the glass gave an unbroken view of the skyline. The conversation began with polite deflections, how long they'd been at the event, whether the auction items were worth bidding on, but slid quickly into sharper territory. She challenged his views on energy policy. He countered with questions about the objectivity of journalists. There was heat in their words, but also a strange undercurrent of curiosity, as if each was mapping out the other's mind with deliberate strokes. When the band slowed to a low, jazzy number and the crowd thinned toward the dance floor, Damian realized he didn't want the night to end. He didn't say it. Neither did she. But an hour later they were in his penthouse. The city sprawled beneath them in a blur of lights. It wasn't rushed, though the air between them was charged. Her hands were steady when she unbuttoned his shirt, his breath uneven when she smiled. At the way he was watching her, there was a tenderness he hadn't expected, a quietness in the way she moved that made it feel less like conquest and more like discovery. Before dawn, she was gone. No note, no last name. Damian stood at the window afterward, the echo of her laughter still threading through his mind, telling himself it was nothing more than an interlude. But elsewhere, in the muted light of an empty street, Lila crouched near a loading bay with her camera raised. The lens caught a series of figure suits in hushed conversation, hands passing folders. The distinct logo of Vale Global's biggest partner stamped on the side of a shipment crate. Each click of the shutter was deliberate, precise. When she slipped the memory card into her jacket pocket, her fingers lingered for a second. The images could bring down powerful people. They could also ruin Damian Vale, and she had no idea yet which choice she would make. The rain began 2 nights later, sweeping in off the harbor in thin, icy sheets that blurred the skyline and gave the streets a restless shimmer. Damian Vale sat alone in his corner office, the city glowing like an electrical map beneath the glass. He should have been reviewing acquisition reports, preparing for the board's quarterly meeting, but every line of text dissolved into the memory of a laugh hers, and the way she looked at him as if she saw the man behind the title dotted irritated him. Not the memory itself, but the fact that it lingered. He was disciplined about compartmentalizing women belonged in one box, business in another, and neither bled into the other. But Lila Monroe, with her measured words and unshaken gaze, had slipped through a seam he didn't know he had. He told himself she was probably just another ambitious guest at a gala, there to collect a few useful connections. Still, He had run her first name through his internal networks, a casual search, no pressure, nothing, no gala registry entry, no media list mention, nothing to anchor her in the carefully archived record of that night. She had left no digital shadow. That made her interesting. That also made her dangerous. On the other side of the city, Lila was in the dark room of a cramped apartment 3 floors above a bakery. The smell of coffee and yeast from below mixed with the tang of photographic chemicals. She worked in silence, watching images appear on glossy paper in slow, ghostly detail. 3 men in tailored coats unloading sealed crates. A handshake between a board member of Armitage Industries, Damian's largest partner, and a man Lila knew to be blacklisted from government contracts for human rights violations. Another frame, a customs official looking the other way as paperwork changed hands. She hung the photos in a neat row along the wire. They were her insurance and her curse. Publishing them would ignite an investigation that could unravel years of political protection around Armitage. But it would also splash onto Damian Vale, whether he was complicit or not. At midnight, she zipped the negatives into a waterproof pouch and tucked them inside the lining of her coat. Then she slipped out into the rain. 3 blocks away, a sedan idled in the shadows. Inside, a man with a scar that cut a thin white line through his eyebrow watched her. Through rain-speckled glass, he spoke into a phone, voice low. "She's on the move. Confirmed she has the package." Damian heard about it the next morning, not from his security team, but from Jonathan Reed, an old contact in private intelligence. Reed's message was blunt. "Someone's watching a woman who might be tied to Armitage's offshore shipments. Your name's in the chatter, Damian." That was the moment the walls shifted. If she was connected to this, if the photos were real, then she wasn't just a memory from a night he shouldn't have remembered. She was now a liability, or a lifeline. And Damian Vale had built his empire by knowing exactly when to destroy a threat or protect it. The rain had stopped, but the streets still glistened under the morning light, every puddle holding a fractured reflection of the sky. Damian Vale stepped out of his town car at precisely 9:03 a.m., adjusting the cuff of his shirt as he scanned the busy plaza. He was here for a reason that had nothing to do with business, though if anyone asked, he'd say it was about an investment prospect in the old Whitford building. He spotted her before she saw him. Lila Monroe, hair pulled back, coat collar up, her stride quick but unhurried. She carried herself like someone who knew she might be followed, yet refused to look over her shoulder. In one hand, a camera bag, in the other, a coffee that had already gone cold. Damian noted the faint tension in her jaw, the way her gaze swept windows and alley mouths without breaking pace. He let her pass him, then spoke low enough for only her to hear. "Lila." She froze mid-step, not turning immediately, the reaction of someone measuring her options. Finally, she glanced sideways, eyes sharp. "I was hoping we wouldn't run into each other again." "Hope," he said evenly, "isn't much of a strategy." Her lips curved in a humorless smile. "Neither is stalking someone in broad daylight." Damian gestured toward a cafe tucked into the corner of the plaza. 15 minutes, somewhere public, unless you'd rather I ask my questions here, inside. The cafe smelled of cinnamon and strong espresso. They chose a booth in the far corner, sunlight pooling over the table like a stage light. Lila kept her bag beside her, one hand resting casually but deliberately on the zipper. Damian leaned back, studying her the way he might study a rival across a negotiation table, patiently, looking for cracks. "You've been busy," he said. Her gaze didn't waver. "So have you. Expanding Vale Global's influence, pushing green tech into markets that don't have the regulations to keep you honest. Must be exhausting." He felt the jab, but kept his tone neutral. "I'm hearing things, Lila, that you're sitting on material people would pay to bury. That my name's been mentioned in the same breath as smuggling and illegal contracts. So I'm wondering, is that intentional? Or are you just collateral damage in someone else's game?" Something flickered in her eyes, gone too fast to pin down. "If I had something, Damian, you'd be the last person I'd trust with it." "That's interesting," he said quietly, "because from where I'm sitting, you're in over your head. Someone's watching you, someone not as patient as I am." Her fingers tightened on the coffee cup. Outside the window, a black SUV idled half a block down. Damian saw it. "So did she neither mention it?" "You think I'm scared of your world?" she asked. "I think," he said, leaning forward just enough for his voice to drop to a thread. "You have no idea how quickly Mine can erase someone like you. For a moment, neither moved. Then, Lila's expression shifted, not to fear, but to something closer to challenge. Then I guess you'll have to decide whether to erase me, or help me finish what I started. And in that moment, Damian realized this wasn't going to be a negotiation. It was going to be a war, one where choosing the wrong side could cost him everything. The city fell into darkness without warning. One moment, the streets below Damian Vale's penthouse glowed with the usual neon and traffic lights. And the next, it was as if someone had poured ink over the skyline, even from 30 floors up. He could hear the shift in the city's rhythm, the horns cut short, the faint shouts, the way the air seemed to thicken when power died. He wasn't surprised. Blackouts in this part of the city didn't happen by accident. Damian had been pacing for an hour, the meeting with Lila Monroe replaying in his mind. She left with her chin up and her eyes full of fire, but he'd seen the tension in her shoulders, the way her hand hovered near her bag like a lifeline. He'd nearly called her twice, to warn her, to demand the truth, but both times he'd stopped. He didn't chase people. They came to him. The buzz of his secure line broke the silence. Vale. He answered, "Sir, we just lost feed." From the east surveillance grid, his head of security said, voice tight, "And you're going to want to hear this. We picked up movement near Monroe's apartment." Damian didn't wait for more details. The phone was still in his hand when he stepped into the private elevator, his driver already alerted before the doors closed. When he reached her building, the blackout had swallowed it whole. No lobby lights, no hum from the elevator cables. He took the stairs two at a time, outside her apartment door. The faint scratch of metal against metal stopped him cold. Someone was picking the lock from the inside. He didn't think. The door burst open under his weight, slamming into the wall. Two men in dark clothing spun toward him, one holding a flashlight, the other already reaching inside his coat. Damian's hand closed around the nearest object, a heavy camera tripod leaning against the wall, and swung. The man went down with a grunt, the flashlight clattering to the floor. The second man bolted for the fire escape, disappearing into the dark before Damian could give chase. "Lila," he called, scanning the apartment. Her voice came from the bedroom, sharp and wary. "I'm fine. Don't come closer." He stepped into the doorway anyway and found her crouched beside the bed, her camera bag clutched tight against her chest. Her hair was loose, falling into her eyes, and there was a thin streak of dust on her cheek. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. "Saving your life," he said flatly. "Those men weren't here to borrow sugar." She didn't smile. Slowly, she stood, her knuckles white on the strap of the bag. "I told you. I don't need your help." He took a step closer, and that was when he saw it. The lining of the bag had been slit open, and tucked into the seam was a small, weatherproof SD card case. She noticed his glance and zipped the bag shut instantly. "That's what they were after," he said. "Maybe," she replied, her tone careful, "or maybe they were after me." Damian's instincts told him both were true. He reached for the bag, not to take it, but to anchor her attention. "Layla, whatever's on that card, if it connects to Armitage, then you're not just in danger. You're sitting on something that could burn half the city's power brokers to the ground, including me." Her eyes flicked up to his, and for the first time that night, he saw hesitation crack through her resolve. "And what would you do if it does?" He didn't look away. "That depends on whether you're planning to destroy me or save me." Lightning flared beyond the window, throwing their faces into sharp relief. And in that split-second flash, Damian knew the decision she made next would alter both of their lives, and neither of them could undo it. If you want, I can roll directly into Part 5, where Damian stages the fake fight and then to work in secret to verify the evidence, while the threat escalates into a high-stakes confrontation. That's where the suspense can really spike. Rain drummed against the high windows of Damian Vale's office like impatient fingers, a steady percussion underscoring the risk he was about to take. The city had power again, but the blackout had left a trace of unease in the air, as though everyone was waiting for the next blow. Lila sat across from him at the far end of the long glass conference table. She looked small against the expanse of polished surface, but there was nothing diminished in her gaze. The camera bag was gone. The SD card was now in a plain envelope, tucked into Damian's inside pocket. Neither of them trusted the other enough to hold it, but neither was willing to walk away from it. "Are you ready?" he asked. Her lips curved, but it wasn't a smile. "For you to humiliate me in front of your people, Sure, I can't wait. It's not humiliation, Damian said evenly. It's strategy. You want the people watching us to think we've severed ties. You storm out. I look furious. They relax their surveillance just enough for us to work without them breathing down our necks, and in the meantime, she said, folding her arms, the board thinks I'm another scandal you buried. Wouldn't be the first time, he murmured, then caught the sharp flicker in her eyes and regretted the joke. Lila, if we don't throw them off, we won't make it to the point where your story matters. They rehearsed the scene quickly, just enough for timing. Then Damian buzzed in his assistant and let the performance begin. The voices carried down the hall. You think you can buy me off? Lila's tone was sharp enough to draw a few curious glances from passing staff. I'm offering you a way to walk away from this before you ruin yourself, Damian replied, letting his voice rise, each word clipped like a gavel strike. She slammed her palms on the table, leaned in, and said something he didn't expect. You don't scare me, Damian. You never did. And for a split second, he wasn't acting. He turned away sharply, muttering something about her being finished here. As she stormed past the assistant with her coat over one arm, doors closed. The watchers would think it was over. Hours later, they met again in the service corridor beneath one of Vale Global's distribution hubs, a place the press never saw and the board pretended didn't exist. The air smelled faintly of oil and ozone, and somewhere above them, the mechanical whir of conveyor belts hummed. Damian handed her a small tablet, its screen glowing with columns of numbers and encrypted communications. This is the first layer. Transactions routed through shell companies, offshore accounts. Enough to take down Armitage if it's verified, Lila scrolled, her eyes narrowing. And enough to implicate you as their biggest partner. He didn't flinch, which is why I need to be the one standing next to you when this comes out. If I walk away now, they'll rewrite the narrative before your story even runs. Before she could respond, the overhead light flickered. Damian's instinct sharpened instantly. He caught a faint metallic click from the shadows at the far end of the corridor, a sound he knew too well. Move, he said. Just as the first shot punched into the wall behind them, they ran, footsteps pounding over concrete, the envelope with the SD card pressed flat between Damian's hand and his chest. In the echoing dark, Lila's breath was ragged but steady, her voice barely audible over the clamor. You still think this is just about Armitage? Damian didn't answer. He couldn't, because in that moment, he realized she was right. This was bigger, much bigger, and somewhere in that envelope was the kind of truth that could ruin them both, or become the only thing that kept them alive. The rain had stopped, but the air over the abandoned rail yards still smelled of metal and ozone, the kind of damp that clung to skin and made the night feel heavier than it should. Rusted freight cars loomed in crooked lines, their graffiti streaked, flanks catching what little light bled from a lone security lamp. Damian Vale stood just beyond that pale circle, his coat collar up, one hand inside the inner pocket where the envelope rested against his chest. He heard the approach before he saw it, tires hissing over wet gravel, engines cutting in synchronized unison. The black SUVs rolled to a stop at the yard's edge, doors opening in quick succession. Adrian Cross, the man who had been his partner in a dozen multi-million-dollar ventures, stepped out first. His tailored coat was immaculate despite the mud, his smile a predator's calm. You didn't have to make this so dramatic, Damian, Adrian said, voice smooth. We could have handled this over brandy, like gentlemen. Damian's reply was quiet, but carried. Gentlemen don't hire men with guns to chase women through alleys. A flicker of annoyance crossed Adrian's face, but he didn't deny it. You have something that belongs to me. Behind Damian, Lila emerged from the shadows between the freight cars. She'd insisted on coming, despite his warnings. Her eyes were steady, but her knuckles were white where she gripped her camera bag. You mean something that could put you in prison, she said, her voice cutting through the cool night air. The smile didn't falter. You're playing a dangerous game, Miss Monroe. Damian stepped slightly in front of her. No, Adrian. The dangerous game was thinking you could bury what's on this card forever. He pulled the envelope from his coat and held it up, watching Adrian's gaze track it like prey. Here's your choice. You walk away from Armitage, every deal, every contract, and disappear quietly, or I drop this in the lap of every regulator and journalist I know for the first time. Adrian's composure cracked. And you think you come out clean in this? You were in it with me, every cent, every shipment. That's the difference between us, Damian said, his voice hardening. I'm willing to burn it down, even if it takes me with it. A sound split the tense air, the high-pitched whine of approaching sirens. Headlights washed over the far end of the yard. Adrian's men shifted, hands brushing the edges of their coats. This isn't over, Adrian said, his eyes locking on Damian with something between fury and grudging respect. Then he signaled to his men, and they melted back toward the SUVs. By the time the first squad cars pulled in, Adrian was gone in the chaos. Lila stepped close to Damian. You didn't give him the real one. No, Damian said, pulling a second SD card from his coat. It was slimmer, darker, and marked with a single red stripe. He pressed it into her hand. This is what I didn't tell you. Everything on the first card was bad enough, but this, she glanced down, reading the file names through the clear case. Her breath caught. This isn't just Adrian. This is a sitting senator, one who's been greasing the rails for every illegal shipment. Damian said, if this goes public, it doesn't just bring him down. It exposes everyone in his shadow network. The fallout will be catastrophic. For a moment, only. The hum of police radios filled the air. Then Lila closed her fingers around the card. So what now? Do we end them, or do we survive? Damian looked at her, really looked, and felt the weight of the choice settle on him. Destroy them all and risk his own ruin, or hold the leverage and become something else entirely. The night wind curled between the freight cars, carrying the scent of rain and iron. Somewhere in that dark, the decision waited. And Damian Vale, for the first time in years, didn't know which way he would turn.